A diplomatic statement about the South China Sea has produced an unusual geopolitical map. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, and Slovenia joined the Philippines, Japan, the United States, and several other governments in defending the 2016 arbitration ruling against China's maritime claims. Yet Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, countries located beside the disputed waters and possessing direct interests in their future, did not sign. That contrast deserves more attention than the familiar dispute over China's claims. The statement was addressed to Beijing, but its composition revealed something uncomfortable about Southeast Asia itself. A regional security issue is increasingly being managed through coalitions assembled outside the region, because ASEAN cannot agree on how firmly it should respond. The statement commemorated the 10th anniversary of the arbitration award, obtained by the Philippines in 2016. The tribunal concluded that China had no legal basis for claiming broad historic rights across much of the South China Sea. It also clarified the maritime status of several disputed features, and found that some Chinese activities had violated the Philippines' sovereign rights. China rejected the proceedings from the beginning and continues to describe the award as illegitimate. Since international arbitration does not come with its own Coast Guard or Navy, the ruling has never prevented China from maintaining a substantial physical presence in contested waters. Chinese Coast Guard ships and maritime militia vessels continue to operate around areas claimed by the Philippines, while Filipino fishermen report being driven away from traditional fishing grounds. The result is a widening separation between legal authority and physical control. Manila possesses a favorable international judgment, while Beijing has the ships, surveillance capacity, and permanent operational presence needed to influence what actually happens at sea. The new statement attempts to keep the legal judgment politically relevant. 14 countries reaffirmed that the ruling is final and binding between China and the Philippines on the matters it addressed. They opposed harassment and intimidation by Coast Guards and maritime militia, while emphasizing that maritime disputes should be resolved under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The participation of the United States, Japan, and Australia was predictable. Each has security interests in maintaining freedom of navigation and limiting the expansion of Chinese control across the Western Pacific. Britain and Canada also fit within a broader group of states that regularly support the existing maritime order. The involvement of the Baltic and Eastern European countries is more revealing. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have no territorial claims in the South China Sea, and their commercial fleets are not determining the daily balance of power near Scarborough Shoal. Their decision to sign reflects a concern that extends beyond this particular maritime dispute. Small European states tend to view international law as a practical form of security rather than an abstract diplomatic preference. Their sovereignty depends partly on the belief that borders and legal rights cannot be erased merely because a more powerful country possesses the means to challenge them. The South China Sea ruling, therefore, carries implications that reach far beyond Southeast Asia. These governments are not claiming that the South China Sea and the war in Ukraine are identical situations. They are responding to a shared problem involving the relationship between power and law. When a major country rejects an unfavorable legal outcome, maintains pressure for long enough, and gradually establishes control on the ground or at sea, the international community must decide whether the original rules still matter. For the Baltic states, allowing such behavior to become normal in Asia could weaken the principles they depend upon in Europe. Their participation suggests that European and Indo-Pacific security are becoming connected through a common debate over whether strategic facts can be created through persistence, coercion, and superior military capacity. The more awkward question concerns the Southeast Asian governments that remained outside the statement. Vietnam has one of the most serious maritime disputes with China and has experienced confrontations involving drilling operations, fishing vessels, and Coast Guard activity. Malaysia has overlapping claims and has faced Chinese pressure near offshore energy projects. Indonesia does not regard itself as a claimant to the island disputes, but China's expansive maritime map overlaps with waters around the Natuna Islands. Brunei also claims an exclusive economic zone that intersects with areas claimed by Beijing. Their absence should not be interpreted as acceptance of China's position. Each government has its own reasons for avoiding a public coalition that Beijing would regard as hostile. Vietnam carefully protects its strategic autonomy and avoids becoming visibly dependent on any single great power. Malaysia often favors quieter diplomacy and seeks to preserve a large economic relationship with China. Indonesia remains sensitive to anything suggesting that external powers should determine Southeast Asia's security agenda. Cambodia and Laos maintain particularly close political and economic relationships with Beijing, which makes a strong ASEAN-wide position even harder to achieve. ASEAN's consensus-based decision-making system intensifies these differences. A regional statement can rarely go further than its most reluctant members are willing to accept. Language becomes cautious, references to responsibility are softened, and legal principles may be acknowledged without identifying the state accused of violating them. This method helped ASEAN survive decades of political diversity among its members, but it performs poorly when decisive action is required against a powerful external state. China does not need every ASEAN government to support its position. It only needs enough disagreement to prevent the organization from adopting a unified response. The joint statement shows how the Philippines is adapting to this limitation. Rather than waiting for ASEAN consensus, Manila is gathering support from governments that are prepared to endorse the arbitration ruling explicitly. This approach allows the Philippines to internationalize the dispute and reduce the imbalance it faces when negotiating directly with China. A bilateral contest between China and the Philippines overwhelmingly favors Beijing. China possesses a much larger economy, a stronger navy, the world's largest coast guard, and extensive influence over Philippine trade. Once the dispute becomes connected to the United States, Japan, Australia, and European governments, the diplomatic cost of coercion rises. This type of coalition is sometimes described as minilateralism. Governments with compatible interests cooperate on a particular issue without creating a large permanent institution or waiting for an entire region to agree. The arrangement is faster and more flexible than ASEAN consensus, although it also carries significant risks. The Philippines gains diplomatic support, but the dispute becomes more closely tied to wider competition between China and the United States. Beijing can then argue that the confrontation is being manufactured by powers from outside Southeast Asia. China's response to the anniversary statement followed this pattern, blaming increased foreign military deployments for regional instability and objecting strongly to the role played by Japan. That argument is useful to Beijing because many Southeast Asian governments genuinely want to avoid choosing between China and the United States. They rely on China for trade, investment, and infrastructure, while often depending on the United States and its allies for strategic balance. They prefer a regional order in which neither side becomes dominant enough to eliminate their freedom of action. The Philippines is moving closer to the American alliance network because it believes the immediate danger comes from Chinese pressure at sea. Other ASEAN states may share Manila's concerns without sharing its tolerance for military alignment. Their silence reflects caution, but it also leaves the Philippines with fewer regional options. This creates a serious dilemma for ASEAN. When the organization cannot protect the interests of a member facing external pressure, that member searches for support elsewhere. As outside powers become more involved, ASEAN loses influence over the dispute. The organization then warns against great power rivalry, even though its own inability to act helped create the opening through which that rivalry entered. The symbolism of the anniversary statement is therefore more consequential than its immediate practical effects. It will not force Chinese vessels to leave Scarborough Shoal. It will not restore access for Filipino fishermen, and it does not create any new military obligation among the countries that signed it. Its significance lies in the coalition it reveals. The Philippines is beginning to treat support from distant partners as more obtainable than agreement from neighboring governments. European states are entering an Asian maritime dispute because they believe the underlying legal principles affect their own security. ASEAN continues to describe itself as central to regional diplomacy, while the most politically sensitive questions are increasingly handled around it. China may calculate that time remains on its side. Ships, patrol routes, and administrative routines can gradually make Chinese control appear permanent, even when other governments reject the legal basis for it. A joint statement can preserve diplomatic opposition, but a document cannot compete directly with vessels that remain at sea every day. The challenge for the Philippines is to convert international support into practical restraint, without allowing its dispute to become merely another arena for confrontation between Washington and Beijing. The challenge for ASEAN is even more fundamental, because its claim to regional centrality will become harder to defend when governments outside Southeast Asia are willing to make clearer statements about the region's security than ASEAN itself. The strangest feature of the joint statement is therefore also its most important. Baltic governments located thousands of kilometers away were prepared to defend a South China Sea ruling that most Southeast Asian states would not publicly endorse together. Their participation strengthened the Philippines' legal position, while the regional silence exposed how little agreement exists among the countries that will live most directly with the consequences. The South China Sea dispute is often presented as a contest between Chinese power and American influence. The anniversary statement reveals another struggle beneath that rivalry, involving Southeast Asia's ability to shape its own strategic environment. Unless ASEAN can bridge the divisions among its members, the future of regional security will increasingly be decided by smaller coalitions operating beyond ASEAN's control.